Hey everyone, I'm Nitish Manocha and I built this bike. Now that the cinematic shot is over, I would like to say that building this bike was not so easy. I have over 180 GBs of video of just me working in my home workshop, as you can see here. So let me walk you through what this is, why I made it, how I made it, some challenges I faced along the way, and then we'll discuss what's next for this project. So, I'm building a self-balancing autopilot bike. As the name suggests, the bike will have the ability to balance itself as well as navigate its surroundings. I like to think of it as a Tesla but on two wheels. I aim to use reaction wheels for self-balancing and AI vision and radar for autopilot. I would like to mention here that this project is a home build on a tight budget, so there are some cost cuttings here and there. However, this chassis is just the first step of the project and the bigger challenge it solves. So, coming to the bigger challenge, why did I make this bike in the first place? So in India, where I belong, we had over 250 million two-wheelers as of 2020, accounting for 75% of all vehicle registrations, letting India have the highest number of two-wheelers in the whole world. So with such a substantial rider population, I found an opportunity to shift the mindset from internal combustion engines to electric. But for this transition to happen, the electric vehicles did not only have to be just slightly better or slightly more range or slightly faster. They had to provide something way more beneficial that people cannot resist but transition for. Therefore, I decided with the idea of electric self-balancing autopilot bike. It would take the load off of balancing a bike as well as riding it. This prototype, however, does not give the full image of how the bike is gonna be. I envision it to be a two-wheeled capsule capable of carrying 2 to 3 people safely and quickly. This prototype does give a proof of working of the technology that's gonna go in the future bike. Therefore, I've split this project into 3 phases, with the first one being the chassis build that you're seeing here. Okay, a lot of talk about the goals, now let's get to the fun part. How did I make this chassis? I planned this to be a no-welder project, that is building with only using basic tools like a drill, an angle grinder and some basic workshop tools like wrenches and pliers. So I used box sections and bolts as I don't require welding to attach them together. This is also my first time working with an angle grinder and metal at this scale. Therefore, the goal is simple, make this drawing in real life. The basic design. Now, since we are making a no welding project, it's gonna be tough. So to begin with, I bought the required tools and some scrap bike parts which I could get my hands on. I got the rear wheel, swing arm, twin suspension, chain, handlebar and the front fork assembly. Let me walk you through them. So these are the parts that I've sourced from a scrap bike. First, we have a huge wheel here. This is a 17-inch wheel and I believe it's a 120 mm cross section, but I'm not sure about that. Then I've got a swing arm. This is a swing arm from the bike that I got all these parts from. It is a quite rusted swing arm. Then I've got chain here and I'll tell you the story about this later. And I've got 2 suspension arms here, which were both of the swing arm. And then I've got this handle over here, which goes onto this wheel. Is the whole contraption, housing, whatever you can call it, that I've got from the scrap bike. It is a 17-inch wheel and I guess it's a 80 mm. So let's start with building the chassis. After all the designing, I started with the lower mid-frame. On the first part itself, I burned through 2 drill bits. But learning from my mistake, I started using coolant during the drills. Attaching the first 2 metal bars was a hassle, but I tried different ways and eventually stuck with one. Then I went on to make the seat. Again, after visualizing a lot of different joining methods, I decided on the one that would provide strength as well as be easy to make. I had 3 support bars in the seat to provide rigidity. Here I started making the seat back, but then I paused because it was a purely design part and I wanted to make the structural parts first. Moving on, I worked on the rear of the midframe and attached the seat to the midframe. I also added a support extension from the mid of the seat to the rear of the midframe bar to increase the weight distribution and hence structural strength. Then I used long bolts to attach the swing arm to the rear of the midframe, after which I added the seat, rear midframe and lower midframe and the swing arm all together and attached them. Now you can see me joining the seat extension from the seat to the midframe. This took a lot more time than I previously expected. Then I began working on connecting the middle of the midframe to the rear end. This part was designed to provide weight distribution to the rear end of the midframe, where both the seat extension and the suspension were gonna attach. Moreover, it also strengthened the middle of the midframe, tying the whole chassis together very strongly. Then I copied the same to the other side. Here it was very important to have both sides dimension exactly the same to avoid any weird flexing in the chassis. Therefore, you can see me calculating and comparing both the sides to avoid any mistakes. Now comes the first instance of non-collinear bolts. After making the other side of the midframe and while bolting everything together, I found them weirdly misaligned and having misaligned bolts. Now you can see me fixing it. Then I began working on the upper midframe. This was a especially complex part because it was in an angle and had to connect to two vertical bars. I measured everything precisely and then began cutting to join them at the required angles. After making both sides of the upper midframe, I was happier than ever. Not able to contain myself, I tried to test it out by sitting on it as I believed it was built enough to support my weight. And it did. Then I began bolting in the upper part of the midframe as I tested it without it actually being attached. At this point I was so close to having the rear wheel attached and completing the rear end of the chassis, so keeping up the spirit, I started making the suspension mounts as they were the main part to attach to the wheel. For this I had to figure out a new way of attaching the suspension as they were much shorter than what I expected while designing the chassis. So I made an extension from the suspension to the rear midframe, bolting where the seat extension is already bolted. Then I did the same for the other side and voila, it was ready to put a wheel on and it took my weight. It felt so good at this moment. Here you can see me giving a whole 8-minute brief about the project and the status of the project till date as I was not able to contain my happiness seeing the project build to the stage. However, I'm not gonna bore you with playing all of it. The fact was that I was at cloud 9. This is how it looked. The next day I started working to complete the front of the midframe. After a lot of calculations, measurements, knocking my camera over, cutting and bending, I built the front fork attachment. Then I made one side of the midframe and then the other, completing the midframe. But I found out that even after all the measurements and calculations, the chassis was still misbalanced and tipping onto one side. So I took the rear wheel off and started checking the cause of this misbalance. As you can see here, after some looking around and measuring, what could be the reason other than misaligned holes? So after dismantling and correcting the holes, it was finally standing straight. By this time, the front fork attachment was done fabricating. I got it fabricated from a fabrication shop as I didn't have the right tools to fabricate a cylindrical piece at home that can take up so much structural weight. I also got a small piece of box section welded to the cylindrical piece to make it sturdy enough. I know this was supposed to be a no welder project, but I had to do this to complete the front end. So I got the part home and then I figured out that the pipe at the front of the fork had a wider diameter at the top and a narrower diameter at the middle and the bottom. Since the cylindrical attachment was supposed to go in the middle, I didn't account and calculate for the upper wider diameter, and not realizing that without the diameter at the top it couldn't slide in. In short, the top of the pipe was 2 mm wider than the inner diameter of the cylinder, so I had no choice than to grind it off. But anyways, I was able to get the front end sorted. Then I figured out that the front end of the lower midframe wasn't as strong as I didn't put the support metal I designed for that place. So I built it up, bolted it in, and the chassis was complete. No, it wasn't. The front end was done and the midframe was done, but both of them were still not bolted together. But I had a plan, so I got working. After many hours of measuring, cutting, drilling, I was finally able to make this Byzantine of a part, a very over-engineered solution to a very simple problem. After some minor changes to it and a bit more welds, the bike stood up on its wheels and here we are, right next to it. It weighs 61 kgs as of now. There were some great lessons for me from this phase of the project, some of which I did learn the hard way. To begin with, I bought the wrong bolts. I bought the 12mm bolts looking at their thickness and strength to hold up the chassis. However, I didn't realize that I didn't have the right tools to drill a 12mm hole in my box sections. I had two 10mm drills, but none of them could hold a bed size 12mm. So I bought a step drill, which didn't work as well. I'll tell you why in a minute. Then I also bought a hole saw, sized 14mm, But I wasn't satisfied with the oversized holes, so in the end I had to get all of them replaced with some 9mm bolts. Secondly, I burnt up HSS step drill and a Bosch HSS drill bit within the first 2 days of my project. So after many rounds to different shops and trying to find a even stronger bit, and after some research, I finally realized the importance of cutting fluid and cooling the drill bit while drilling. Therefore, on all the holes from a third drill bit since, I've used water as a coolant. Fun fact, the third drill bit, which is also a Bosch SSS drill bit, has thrived through all the holes ever since I corrected myself. Thirdly, concentric holes. They are a real pain. Since I have a hand drill and not a drill press, a lot of the holes on the box sections have the holes on two sides slightly misaligned. I tried to measure, calculate and drill the holes on both the sides separately. It did result in some of the holes being perfectly concentric, but it is way too hard to do on every single hole of the project. Therefore, if drilling a lot of concentric holes, it's best to have a drill press at hand. Then I learned how to use an angle grinder. This is my first project with metal at this scale, therefore it's also my first time working with an angle grinder. It is a cool tool, but only when used properly. Before working with it, I was quite a bit nervous about using such a dangerous tool, but then I learned all the precautions and gained confidence. I only used my first cutting disc about 30% before it broke, but as I corrected myself and my technique, the second disc has been going strong and I've used almost 70% of it for the rest of the project. And last but not the least, design. I learned through the process of designing this bike and then actually building it, and sometimes we need to amend the design a bit to have best fit with what we have in real life. But after all of this, the chassis is complete. Now, with the chassis complete and the bike standing on its own wheels, the phase 1 of this project is completed. I have divided this project into 3 main phases: chassis, self-balancing and autopilot. After the third phase, there will be some end refinements like making the fairing of the bike or painting it, etc. So now, with the chassis complete, I'll move on to the next phase of the project, the self-balancing phase. In it, I'll design, build and mount a reaction wheel based self-balancing system to keep the bike upright with and without the rider. Thank you everyone for watching till the end. I hope you like the progress and I'll see you in the next one.